In the last few years, I've become a huge Fire Emblem fan, and Three Houses marked the first time where I followed a Fire Emblem game from the first trailers all the way to its release. And this game certainly lived up to the hype. There are so many aspects worth praising when it comes to this masterpiece. But today I want to talk about the one that's the most important to me, the amazing characters. From the admittedly small selection of Fire Emblem games I've played, Three Houses easily blew the others out of the water when it comes to how well written the playable units are. They are so amazing that they inspired me to make a 4-part series ranking every character from every house. And where better to start with the first one I chose, the Black Eagles. But before we can start, here are the rules for these videos. First of all, I'll only be ranking the students, not Byleth or any of the professors. I also decided not to rank Joritza. I'll talk about him when I get to the Church of Zeros characters. Second of all, note how the title says characters and not units. This is because I'll be ranking them solely based on how much I like the personalities, how much I enjoyed their supports, the like. I might bring up their performances on the battlefield every now and then, but know that it had very little to do with their placements on the list. And this goes without saying, but this is of course my opinion. But with all that out of the way, here's my ranking of every student from the Black Eagle house. Okay, right off the bat, I just want to say that I don't think there are any bad characters in this game. Hell, I can't even say that I hate any of the playable ones. There are just a few that I like a bit less than the others. So, with that in mind, Lionheart. Look, despite me putting him on the lowest spot on the list, I can still see a lot of things to like when it comes to Sleepy Boy. For starters, he just has the best introduction in the whole game.
Lionheart, goodbye.
Come on, you can't top that. Second of all, I noticed he's part of an FE archetype I like to call the guy who acts lazy but turns out to have his priorities straight and knows what he wants in life. Only consisting out of him and Python. It might at first just seem like he's the #relatable dumb and lazy student, but as it turns out he might be one of the smartest people in the entire academy, who just doesn't feel motivated to stay awake for things he doesn't care about. However, the guy does have a genuine interest when it comes to quests. And thanks to that interest, his supports with Flame, Marianne and especially Lysithea are really interesting. I just think it's amazing that most other characters that support with these three only found out about their secrets around the A support, while Lionheart just casually starts off the first convo with "Hey, so you're hiding a crest, right?" But I gotta say that I don't like him as much in every support he's in. We see a very caring Lionheart when he's talking to Marianne and Dorothea, while with Flame we see a "Hey, let's make babies to confirm my hypothesis" Lionheart. And that just perfectly summarizes how I feel about him. In about half of his supports I really liked him, as he was his witty and snarky self, but still showed that he cared about the person he was talking to. But in the other half, he was nothing more than a stereotypical lazy guy, or just a bit too insensitive for my liking. Again, that doesn't mean that I dislike him by any means. In fact, the support that made me like him the most is the one he has with Byleth, strangely enough. It just explores so many aspects of his character that are otherwise just never touched upon, like his hatred for blood and his doubts about the actual use of his research. This one support shows us a more vulnerable side that we never get to see outside of it, and I feel like if we got to see him open up like this to more people, I would have liked him much more. Nonetheless, Lionheart is a well-written character that deserves all the praise he's gotten, even if his personality doesn't always resonate with me. Fun fact, this used to be one of my most hated characters in the entire game.
Hope you're ready.
Yeah, for the longest time Caspar was not only my least favorite Black Eagle, but just one of my most hated Three Houses characters. And while I started to like him a bit more recently, let me tell you, there were a lot of reasons for why I hated this guy. I know I said I wouldn't take the battle prowess into account, but wow, Caspar was just the absolute worst piece of shit unit on my first Black Eagle run. By the final chapter, I remember that every one of my units could either one-round most enemies or support my team in some meaningful way, while Caspar just couldn't do anything. Aside from that, he just gave me one of the worst first impressions ever. To me, he just came over as this hot-headed idiot who only talks about fighting and training. and his kind of annoying voice didn't really help either. Don't get me wrong here, it's not like he's the only character I had a bad first impression of, but unlike with these characters, I could never really look past that. Only recently, when I rewatched his supports for this video, is when I started opening up to him. While some of his supports are definitely just him yelling and fighting, others did a great job of fleshing out his past. Despite Caspar being born a noble, he didn't gain anything from it, due to being the second son and bearing no crest. He's just one of the many people that got screwed over by the crest-centered society of Votland, but Caspar has just accepted that's how the world works. When life wouldn't give him what he needed from birth, he just decided to work hard and earn it himself, which is a mindset I really respect. I also think it's pretty good that he doesn't hold any grudges or anything towards his own house, but that's not to say that he stands behind all of their actions either. This is to see in my favorite supports of his with Shamir and especially in the one with Petra. In them he shows that he has a huge amount of guilt because his father killed many people from Dagdar and Bridget during the war. Caspar is mostly depicted as this carefree airhead that doesn't linger on his own mistakes and is usually quick to forgive and forget. And that's why I find it so interesting that one of the few times he does dwell on something, it's about the actions of his family which aren't even his fault. That's of course not to say that all of his other supports are all rainbow and sunshine. His support with Byleth turns into one that's all about him contemplating over the consequences of his rash actions, ending up with him accepting his shortcomings and the help from Byleth. These are the supports that, upon revisiting them, made me change my mind on Caspar and made me realize he's not this one-dimensional character I mistook him for. I also like how the developers used him to explore the several downsides of being born in a noble house without a crest. And I gotta say, once I got over my bias, I started to notice how many great little moments he has in his other supports. Like how he gets Annette out of a rut or Bernadetta out of a room. For me, Caspar and a certain other character I'll talk about in a future video will always be reminders not to judge a book by its cover. So some of you might think that I would put all 4 of the male characters at the bottom of this list. But you know, I'm sure some people would be upset if I did that, and I'd rather not raise any controversies. So the next entry is Dorothea! Haha, yeah, let me just save you some of the work. I just want to establish that from now on, I think all the characters on here are incredible. If this were an actual tier list, Lionheart and Caspar would be somewhere around B or C tier, while everyone from here onwards belong in A tier and above. I can absolutely see why Dorothea in particular is so many people's favorite character. Now that that's clear, I didn't exactly came to like Dorothea right away. I mean, everyone else sure did pre-release, but I don't know, the whole flirtatious songstress thing didn't really do it for me. Though over time I did start to warm up to her. For starters, she's just one of the sassiest characters from the entire series. And she especially acts this way towards nobles. Man, it's almost like she had a really bad experience with them that made her act this way. And yep, that's my segue to talk about the backstory. Before she became a popular diva, Dorothea was an orphan, as she was thrown out by her own father because she didn't bear a crest. By pure chance, someone from the opera happened to hear her sing once and decided to put her on stage, which was the start of her career. While she was happy to have gotten this chance, she was aware that the only reason she was liked by the nobles watching her were her looks and her voice, and that one day she would lose both. That's why she's so set on finding a partner while she's still at the academy. She's afraid that if she doesn't find anyone now, she'll end up alone one day. It's completely understandable considering her past, and most of her support partners do help her with her confidence issues in the later convos. And overall, her other interactions are also really good. Her hatred for stuck-up nobles made her supports with Ferdinand and Lawrence all the more interesting, and thankfully she ends up getting over the idea that every noble is the same because of them and Hanuman. She is also just a great friend to characters like Manuela, Petra, and especially Bernadetta, who she should have gotten an A support with! There's clearly a lot to like about her, but it just so happens that I never got too attached to her in any of my playthroughs, hence the lower placement on the list. Still, I hope I made it clear that I think Dorothea is a wonderful character. While I didn't see the appeal at first, after getting to know her, I can confidently say she deserved her reputation both in-game and in the fandom. think I speak for a lot of people when I say that when I saw Hubert for the first time, I thought he would basically be a less attractive Tarja. Turns out I was wrong because he's hot. I mean, he's a great and unique character. Yeah. While his Edelgard obsession might remind me a lot of Tarja, he mostly plays the role of a Frederick or Jacob character, that being one of the overly faithful and loyal servants. Ever since a young age, his father ordered him to protect Lady Edelgard with his life, and to accompany her wherever she goes, as that was the role of his bloodline. While he did it out of obligation at first, he did start to shape a genuine bond with her. And when it turned out that his father was trying to overthrow the empire, Hubert turned his back on him and stayed by Edelgard's side. Years later, he still tries to serve in Her Majesty's best interests at all times, without being a mindless, obedient lapdog. I do like how they make it a point to show that he secretly disobeys Edelgard's orders if he thinks they won't directly benefit her. It just goes to show that he still has a mind of his own. Sadly, Hubert did get the short end of the stick when it comes to supports, as he has the lowest amount of any of the normal students. Still, what we got is pretty decent. In most of his early supports, he's just a complete fucking asshole, and I love it. Him chasing Bernadetta around like he's about to murder her only to give her a lighthearted warning just never fails to put a smile on my face. Of course, he does start to act nicer in most later supports, which might seem like a bit of an unnatural change to some people, but it's actually one that makes a lot of sense when you think about it. He knew all along that Edelgard would turn against the church and that his classmates might become future threats. That's why it might feel like he's just toying with them at the beginning, and why he doesn't even bother speaking to any students from other houses. Only after they've proven that they won't turn against Edelgard is when he starts treating them as friends. The support with Bernadetta once again being a great example for this. I also consider his support with Hanneman to be a character defining one, even if it only goes up to B. In it, he gets confronted by the possibility that his father might have betrayed the Empire for his family's sake, ending up with Hubert deciding that above all, he will still choose Edelgard's side no matter what. I saw a lot of people say that Hubert is their least favorite Black Eagle, and it's easy to understand why. If you didn't like his personality that much from the beginning, he really doesn't get a lot of chances to change your mind. I still think you could have used some more characterization, having him confront his father in a paralogue or something would have helped a lot by example, but I still really like the small amount we have seen from him. He has good chemistry with most of his classmates, got a good amount of chuckles out of me, and thanks to Robbie Damon, he just has one of the best English performances. Seriously, love him or hate him, you gotta admit that Hubert has the best delivered crit quotes in the entire game.
Watch how weak you are! Bow before Her Majesty! There will be no mercy! We will burn together!
Oh yeah, that's the good stuff. Alright, it's time to talk about Edelgard, which means there will be big spoilers for her 2 routes and the Blue Lions one. So please skip to this timestamp if you haven't pumped 200 hours into this game yet. Oh boy, where do I even start with this one? Edelgard has to be one of the most divisive characters in the whole franchise, and that's saying a lot. But to be fair, I feel like this was at least partially intended. As the main villain of 3 routes and the protagonist of 1, it's only logical that there would be a lot of different opinions on her. I mean, if the high placement on this list wasn't a dead giveaway, I obviously like her in Crimson Flower. But don't get me wrong here, I also think she works as a good antagonist. It's easy to feel some sympathy for her, as she just has one of the most messed up backgrounds in the entire series. I recently learned from a YouTuber named Fargast that the Black Eagles were originally meant to have a theme of challenging backgrounds with all of their students, which is something I immediately recognized in most of them, with a few exceptions. Edelgard, however, definitely had it the worst out of all of her classmates. From a young age, she and her siblings were subjected to experiments by the Argarthans, with the goal of letting one person bear 2 crests. Every last one of her siblings, along with a lot of other innocent people, eventually died, only leaving Edelgard herself behind. The operations did eventually prove successful, as she found out she came to bear a 2nd crest. But after witnessing all this ruthless slaughter, Edelgard swore to herself to use her power as future Empress to make sure no one has to suffer like that ever again. She wants to create a world where crests hold no meaning anymore, and instead people would be judged for their talents and abilities. This on its own is a noble goal, and I don't think it's her motivations people have problems with. No, the problem comes in when she declares a war and is the cause for the main conflict in the game's story. For many people, the end doesn't nearly justify the means here. And while I don't necessarily agree with Edelgard's methods, I can at least see where she's coming from. She knew this war would mean she'd be responsible for thousands of deaths, but she truly believes that the faster she can change the system, the lesser people will have to suffer quietly in the end. She might be the antagonist in 3 of the routes, but she's not a bad person at heart, despite a lot of people trying to argue otherwise. If anything, the real villains are the Agarthans, since they are the ones that deceived her and have passed down misinformation about Nemesis to the line of emperors. I can understand that most people might have gotten the impression that she's a heartless conqueror if they haven't played her route. But since I played Crimson Flower first, I always saw her as a good person. She always gives her opponents a chance to surrender and never forces anyone to fight for her. She might be a bit blunt sometimes, but it's clear she genuinely cares for her allies. My favorite example of this being her talk with Byleth after Gerald's murder. When grieving for someone, she says she doesn't see much value in sympathy, as you're the only one that completely understands what that loss meant to you. Rather than standing still to mourn alongside you, Edelgard says that only after you process Gerald's death on your own, she will be ready to help get your life back on track. It might sound a bit harsh at first, but her speech did leave an impact on me after hearing it for the first time. It also lines up really well with her beliefs, as she thinks it's better to rely on your own strength to overcome your struggles, instead of praying to some god and waiting for someone else to solve your problems for you. The last thing I want to talk about surrounding Edelgard are her actions at the end of Azure Moon. When I first saw this cutscene, I thought this would be the point where Edelgard would reach for Dimitri's hand and we'd get our happy ending. And to my surprise, the exact opposite happened. This was an ending that left me speechless upon seeing it for the first time. But looking back at it now, I think it's a fitting end for Edelgard's character in Azure Moon. Believe me, I would have liked an ending where all 3 lords could live happily ever after. But this one is far more faithful to Edelgard's character, as well as the established relationship she had with Dimitri. He gave her the dagger to carve her own way in life, which is exactly what she did from that point onwards. In the end, she was ready to sacrifice everything, even her humanity and potentially her life, so she could change the cruel world that took so much from her. After she's defeated, Dimitri still shows sympathy for her, but she just couldn't accept it. Perhaps she didn't want to live in the world she failed to change anymore, or maybe she felt that she needed to die for her actions. Either way, she thought death was the only way out. Did she throw the dagger back to tell Dimitri that this is the path she'll cling to tell him to carve his own path without her? Did she do it to force him to kill her and move on without her? Or was it just a desperate last resort to kill him? I personally like to believe it's something closer to the first 3 options, but overall I actually like that the meaning behind her actions are left up to interpretation. Honestly, I just wish her own route wasn't as rushed as it is, and that you'd actually get to battle those who slither in the dark with her, but hey, those are problems with the game's story rather than the character herself. For what we have gotten, Edelgard is definitely one of the most interesting and fascinating lords and antagonists we've ever gotten in the entire series. And yet, there were 3 Black Eagles I grew just a bit more attached to than her. Okay, I know this is supposed to be about the characters in Three Houses, but can we talk about how they massacred our poor boy Ferdinand in Heroes for a second? And no, I'm not talking about his stats or his art by the way, but more about his voice lines. Because my god did the translators really drop the ball here. They didn't even give him the line! But on top of that, they just make him come over as a really shallow character. The small amount of voice lines the characters are given in this game are supposed to give people that are new to the series a little insight on them and give them an idea of how they act in their home games. With some characters like Leon, Arvis, Zeke and most of the Three Houses characters, they did a really good job. With others like our boy Ferdinand, it just felt like they didn't bother to read past his T supports. Almost all of his voice lines are just him babbling on about his status and crests. They just ignored so many interesting parts of his character, which is a shame because I actually really like him. A lot of people are quick to judge him based on his obsession with nobility. Hell, half of his own house can't stand him at first because of that. But when you dig a little deeper, you will find a down-to-earth man that just wants the best for his classmates. He's not just proud of being a noble, but he holds all of them, including himself, to a very high and admirable standard. He might try to push his own beliefs onto other people a bit too much sometimes, but once he realizes he's in the wrong, he always tries to understand the other's viewpoint and to learn from his mistakes. His competitive nature might seem a bit out of place at first, but note how he only acts that way with Edelgard. It's just his weird way of proving he can be a capable prime minister, since he believes one should be as skilled as his emperor. And of course he ends up failing miserably at this. But while this upsets him greatly at first, he comes to accept that he can still contribute his share even if he's not the strongest out there, and continues to strive to be the best person he can be. I also like his paralogue, where he comes to accept that his father was a pretty shitty minister, but instead of this getting him down, he vows to make up for his father's wrongdoings. He's far from a perfect human being. He makes mistakes and sometimes he offends people without meaning to, but he always tries to become a better person. He's way more self-aware than people give him credit for, and despite all of his hardships, he always manages to find a way forward. While he'll probably always be known as the very funny meme character, I will always remember him as one of the most inspiring students in this game. He's complex, he's well written, and he is Ferdinand von Aegir. Hey, I never said being meme worthy was a bad thing. You know what sucks about these rankings? The fact that there will be no surprise on who my number 1 will be after this part. Now let me tell you, I absolutely love these next two characters, and picking which one of the two was my favorite was way harder than I expected. I was seriously considering making this character my number 1 for a while, but in the end, I decided to stick with my original placements. So let me tell you why Bernadetta is my second favorite Black Eagle. I know a lot of people think this character is annoying, and believe me, I know where they are coming from. I flip-flopped a lot on how I felt about her on my first playthrough. At first, I got a bit annoyed by her high-pitched voice. But then I got to hear more and realized the VA actually did a really good job. And then I got annoyed again when I realized something. Every C support starts off the same way. Wow, I'm Bernadetta, and what a nice day it is to be alone. I sure hope no one else will come in. I am Ferdinand von Aegir. Yeah, for the first few chapters, I thought she was just going to be this comic relief character with the same support copy pasted 10 times. And then I got to her Dorothea support. When she mentioned her father, I just thought, wow, are they actually gonna go there? And shortly after that I got Byleth's B support, and wow, they actually went there. I already said that I thought Edelgard had it the worst when it came to the challenging backgrounds, but Bernadetta easily takes the second place. It turns out that her father emotionally abused her for years, and apparently he even beat up one of her only friends at some point. This is the reason why she stays inside most of the time and why she's so afraid to talk to anyone. And while her constant screaming when she finally talks might get a bit irritating at times and is played for laughs a bit too much, I just couldn't help but sympathize with her after hearing this. Because of her fears, I found it all the more endearing whenever she was trying to make progress to overcome them. Seeing her finally come out of her room to bring flowers to Gerald's grave, for example, was one of my favorite little moments of hers. Speaking of, I like how much she grew over the 5 years during the time skip. I'm glad they didn't just let her magically overcome her fears, since that just wouldn't be realistic. Instead, she keeps taking little steps that got me to root for her every single time. She becomes more comfortable talking to what were once intimidating figures like Edelgard and Hubert, and she's all around seen outside of her room much more often. You can see this development in her battle quotes too. You can still hear she's scared, but she no longer talks about running away or wanting to go home anymore, and instead puts on a brave face and wants to keep fighting alongside her friends.
I'd rather retreat. Am I done yet? I do this for all of us. A little scratch won't stop me.
Yeah, my social anxiety seems a bit like a non-issue compared to hers, but I can still relate to how difficult it can be to overcome it. Seeing her grow over it little by little just makes you feel good inside. Her development over the entire game really made her deserve the number 2 spot. Alright, you know who's coming up. My favorite Black Eagles character is no one else than Petra. This has been the case since the very beginning. While everyone who chose the Black Eagles seemed to be either an Edelgard, Dorothea or Bernadetta fan, I was a Petra fan from day one. From the character previews, she simply seemed like the most interesting one. Her design instantly made her stand out compared to the others. And hey, she's against discrimination. That's always good. So I already had a good first impression of her going into the game. But the more I got to know her, the more I genuinely started to like her. As the princess of the Empire's vassal state Bridget, Petra is the only character in the academy to come from there. Though this was not by choice. While the rest of the world was told that she was a guest, she was actually used as a sort of hostage, to make sure Bridget wouldn't betray the Empire. Although this obviously scared her at first, she quickly learned the language of Fodlan, though not perfectly, and adapted to their norms. Despite the pretty messed up backstory, Petra was honestly one of the most wholesome and funniest characters for me. She just has this childlike curiosity towards everything she doesn't know of, and always wants to learn as much as possible, which is just really endearing. And her little language mishaps just kinda add to her charm. Despite those childlike qualities, she's actually really mature and responsible. As the crown princess, she's fully aware that Bridget doesn't have the best political power. She feels obligated to learn as much as possible and to make good political relationships while she still can, so that one day Bridget will be better off and on equal terms with the Empire. And despite being kept away from her homeland by the Fire Nation, she doesn't hold any grudges to Edelgard's family or anyone from the Empire for that matter. At least, that's what it seems like at first. This all gets expanded upon in her support with Caspar, the one that made me change my mind on him and made me like Petra even more than I already did. Throughout the entire support, Caspar is afraid that Petra hates him, since they found out Caspar's father was the general that killed the father from Petra. And while she seemed to be upset at first, she later says that she had moved on, and that they shouldn't let a conflict of their parents influence them. By the ace support, however, Petra finally shows her true feelings. She does despise Caspar's father, and the thought of getting revenge by killing his son has sometimes crossed her mind. And yet, she sees Caspar as a good friend, and at the end of the day, she couldn't bring herself to kill anyone she considers a great person without a good reason. This is my favorite Petra support, as it's one of the few times we see her at her lowest points. She finally shows these emotions she kept suppressed for all that time, which lets her and Caspar move on. Most of her other supports are generally more lighthearted, which might actually work in this one's favor. We're so used to seeing this innocent and composed Petra, so when it's completely flipped in one of them, it's obviously going to be a standout between them. I used to think Petra didn't develop a lot, but thinking about it now, I think she does in more subtle ways. Namely that she learned she can be more selfish and to open up to others about her own feelings. She learns to find a good balance between the welfare of Bridget and her own happiness. Just like her supports find a good balance between serious and lighthearted ones. She might not be the most complex character from her house or change as drastically as some other students. But for me, she doesn't need to. She has her serious moments which flesh her out, and at the end of the day, she remains a lovable character that can always make me smile. That is why Petra is my favorite character from the Black Eagles. And this is the end of the Black Eagle part of my Three Houses character ranking. If you're still watching, well, 1, thank you, but 2, it probably means you enjoyed this content. So if you want to see more and help change this awful number, I'd click the subscribe button if I were you. I can tell you that I'll start working on the Blue Lions ranking as soon as I've uploaded this video. And hopefully I won't take forever like I did with this one. In the meantime, you can tell me what your Black Eagle ranking looks like. And hey, if you like Xenoblade, you'll have plenty of other content from me to watch too. Thanks again for sticking with me to the end. This has been Max, signing out.